More than 8% of the global ocean is now classified as protected. So why are sharks still declining inside marine protected areas? Because in many cases, protection exists on paper, but not in practice. This is Ocean Decoded, where we break down what's really happening in the ocean and why it matters. So if you want this type of information, hit that subscribe button and the like button to make sure that you get each and every episode. Let's talk about what a marine protected area is. Essentially, an MPA is defined as a section of ocean where human activities are managed, oftentimes not allowed, to protect an ocean ecosystem. It could protect a habitat like coral reefs, seagrass, mangroves, a sponge reef, oyster bed. It can protect a lot of different things, sometimes just open ocean because there's a lot of pelagic species that go around it. But essentially, it will protect biodiversity, it will protect fisheries, or even sometimes cultural resources, oftentimes cultural resources. But here's the important distinction. Not all MPAs are the same. There are different levels of protection which can put vulnerabilities on that protection. So you have some that are fully protected called no-take reserves, which you can't take anything. There are highly protected ones. There are partially protected ones. There are multiple use areas, and in some cases, areas with almost no real restrictions, but just a boundary in itself. Now, there are MPAs, like the true definition of an MPA, according to the UN and the IUCN, is essentially a no-take reserve where nothing can happen. No extractive activities could happen. There's no fishing, trawling, which is a type of fishing. There's no snorkelers allowed. There's no scuba divers allowed. There's no mining allowed. There's no any kind of extractive process. You can't do anything in those areas. Sometimes you're not even allowed scientists to go in to do the research. They just leave it on its own because it's such a critical habitat, but also sensitive habitat. And some of these habitats are what we call representative habitats, and other habitats are distinctive habitats. A representative habitat was always, and I had a professor who wrote a document on this for World Wildlife Fund back when I was a student in early 2000s. I'm aging myself here, but whatever. It's okay. I'm old. I understand that. I'm old. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay, right? It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. It's okay. But regardless, a representative area is what you expect to see. So the regular fish that you'd expect to see, regular invertebrates, regular habitats that you would expect to see, it's what is typical of a specific area. So if you're looking at a tropical zone, which we all love, you would expect to see a coral reef, maybe seagrass bed, a mangrove in the area. You'd expect to see that kind of stuff. Distinctive areas are something that only happens maybe in a specific season, or it's something that brings together a lot of things. So for instance, upwelling. So an upwelling is essentially where you get resources from the bottom, productivity from the bottom. So plankton, algae, whatever that might be. It's cold, it's rich in productivity, and it brings it up to the surface, right from the deep to the surface. And what that does, that attracts a lot of marine mammals, which eat plankton, like baleen whales. It also brings sharks and different types of fish like tuna, salmon, all these different types of predatory fish. Of course, those fish come in because other smaller fish are coming to feed on the plankton. And so those predatory fish feed on those prey like anchovies, sardines, and certain things like that. And then you have sea turtles that come in, you'll have seabirds that come in, maybe some seals every once in a while, dolphins, and so forth. Like I said, marine mammals. And so you'll see a lot of this happen, but it's only in a specific area, maybe even in a specific season, depending on the circulation, the wind patterns, and all this, and how that upwelling works. You'll see other distinctive habitats like spawning areas or nursing areas, pupping areas if you're a marine mammal person like seals. And so all these distinctive areas have a particular protection, and those are more difficult to protect because they don't always happen, like I said, all year round. They can happen in different seasons, and they can move and they can shift depending on currents and wind patterns and things like that. So they're a little bit more difficult to protect. Representative areas is like those typifying areas is what you would protect all year round because they don't really move much. That's not something that really happens because they're typical, they're representative of that area. So we've gone through a lot, but globally, when you look at all these protective areas, whatever type there are, how well they're protected, more than 8% of the ocean is counted as actually protected, but only a fraction is strongly or fully protected. And there's a difference between highly protected and no-take reserves. And it's weird how all of this happens. When governments are putting together protected areas, it's not an easy process because you have a designation process where you bring all the stakeholders together. So you have fishers, you have oil and gas, you'll have mining, you'll have recreational like scuba diving and kayakers and all these different types of businesses. And they all use the coastline or they all use the ocean in different ways. You have shipping and all this kind of stuff. Some use it for a lot of money, others use it for a little bit of money, but they use it to survive. And so it's a big part of what they do, and they need to make sure that they have access to the ocean. but also they want to make sure that nothing can interfere if something goes bad in one of the other stakeholders. So you have this designation process, which is a very difficult thing, comes to a lot of compromises, a lot of bickering that goes on, and it could be very difficult to negotiate with a lot of these different stakeholders. One that I can't believe I almost forgot, you also have indigenous stakeholders, which is a big part of conservation. A lot of conservation-led organizations are going with indigenous-led conservation because they know how to manage a coastline and the ocean. And a lot of them have been doing it for centuries, if thousands of years, and they know how to do it properly. So now it's a matter of bringing all these different types of stakeholders to the table and being able to have those discussions to be able to put a proper spatial plan forward, which will include marine protected areas. But when we say only 8% is protected, that does not mean that 8% is off limits to fishing, mining, industrial activity. This is what we talk about when we talk about MPAs. There's not a lot of protection. 8% are protected of some sort, but they're not all protected equally. Some of them are paper parks that are just there on paper. So a paper park is essentially an area that is legally designated as protected, but lacks enforcement, monitoring, clear regulations, funding, and political will. All those 5 things have to be in place for a protected area, an MPA, to be fully functional and working. It exists in legislation, it exists in databases, but not necessarily in reality, these paper parks. So research has shown many MPAs allow industrial fishing. We saw that in the UK, especially during the Oceans movie that was narrated by Sir David Attenborough, one of the best ocean narrators or even just naturalists that we've seen in our time. He turned 100, by the way. Shout out to Sir David Attenborough on the 100th birthday. We appreciate all the work you have done for the ocean and for nature and the planet in general. Educating me and all of us that have seen any of his films, always great to see. But, we saw the trawling in these very productive areas that are on the bottom of the ocean in the UK that were in MPAs. And it really highlighted the fact that trawling can't happen in MPAs because it takes a swath away. It basically just takes it all up. I think I've talked about it in episodes before, but if you've seen what a trawler can do, it essentially these 2 doors with a net, a chain going across, it gets dragged along the bottom. That chain just takes up everything along the bottom. Sponges, corals, any type of invertebrate, any type of habitat that's down there. In that swath of that net, the width of that net will be gone. And if you continue to go through that area, everything will be gone. And we've seen that happen. Go watch Ocean's movie. It made me tear up. Definitely made me tear up to see these beautiful sites get destroyed because of fishing in these areas that are supposed to be protected. Many MPAs that allow industrial fishing is not good. The research has shown that lack of patrol capacity will contribute to paper parks, and some don't even have finalized management plans. You have to have a plan before you go in. Whether you're protecting for biodiversity or you're protecting for fisheries, you have to have a plan to understand what you want to take care of. Without the plan, I don't even know if you can consider it a paper park because nobody's going to be doing it. So there's a lot of studies that go around looking at evaluating the effectiveness, and these are the keys. What I just mentioned are the keys to ensuring that your evaluation can be done properly because you know what your goals are, you know how to affect those goals, and of course you know how to adapt to those goals. Adaptive management is a huge part of any type of plan. Any type of management plan where you're looking at an environment or business or finance or whatever that might be, if you don't have the ability to adapt that plan, especially with how things are changing here on our planet because of climate change, then you don't have a plan. You need to do something like this. So analysis showing that only about 2 to 3% of global ocean is actually fully protected. Protection is not defined by a boundary line, an imaginary one at that. It only exists on a map, whether digital or paper. It is defined by what actually changes inside that boundary. The goal of protection, say for fisheries, is to look at that fish that's being protected and to see if the number of individuals and their size goes up to a point where they spill over the boundaries because there's not enough room in there that they have to exit out of the boundaries to live. That's when you have a successful MPA because you've fully protected that area so those fish have time to grow bigger and grow in numbers so that other people can fish them as they spill over the boundaries that are set there. That's how important it is. So what happens to MPAs when they're designated? Why do they become paper parks? A lot of times political incentives are there. So countries have international biodiversity targets. There's a convention on biodiversity that happens every year. There's a COP. Countries who are signatories to that have a global 30 by 30 target that aims to protect 30% of land and 30% of sea by 2030. So 30 by 30. So 30% by 30. And this target was adopted under this convention of biological diversity. The problem is it just measures area and not effectiveness. It's a clear indicator to say, hey, look, we got 30% of our land and 30% of our ocean that is protected, and we are doing well. We are hitting those targets. We've hit 30 by 30, but we don't know the effectiveness. Are those protected areas fully protected? Can nobody go in there and take anything out, land or water? Because that doesn't always happen. And you'll see governments kind of sneak them under different types of rules. So for instance, in Canada, you will have like an Oceans Act. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans can put in place MPAs, marine protected areas, that are fully protected. They used to allow extractive things like fishing and oil and gas. They don't allow that anymore on these marine protected areas. Now, there's not as many marine protected areas, but they don't allow those extractive activities. As far as I know, please correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but as far as I know, that was changed a while ago. So now you have these fully protected marine protected areas, but you also have these other like marine monuments that you can put together, marine conservation areas that other departments for the Canadian government can put together, but they're not fully protected. They allow certain things, and some of them are more cultural, which are important, but they're not going to protect the ecology. And so you have to look at the designation and who's designated and what the legislation says, what the law says of what can be protected. So that happens in Canada quite a bit. It happens in every country. It's not just Canada. It happens in every country. So the thing is, going back, it measures area when you do the 30 by 30, but it doesn't measure effectiveness of these marine protected areas. It is easier politically to draw a large boundary than to enforce strict regulations. Area-based targets reward quantity and not quality. Okay? That can be a problem. Now you have offshore and remote MPAs, or both, one of the two. So some of the largest MPAs are in remote regions. For example, Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Monument and the Chagos Marine Protected Area. These areas are ecologically valuable. But then critics note that designated remote regions can be politically easier than restricting heavily used coastal waters where economic interests are stronger. One of my good friends, Angelo Villagomez, who I do a podcast with, a live podcast called Polar Bears and Flip-Flops. Check it out if you go to Polar Bears and Flip-Flops YouTube channel. And there's going to be an audio version coming out very shortly. We discuss all the time. Angelo discusses all the time. He's from the Pacific Islands. He's from the CNMI, the Northern Mariana Islands. And these islands have marine protected areas. They have the Mariana Trench around them. And so they have the Mariana Trench Marine Monument. And they have others like Papahanaumokuakea is another Pacific Island, I guess, monument, which is protected. These areas protect a lot of land. 90% of the protected areas are done remotely around these islands. So it protects fish and other biodiversity and things like that around these islands, but it also restricts a lot of the people in these islands who depend on the fishing from that area. But we don't see it as many along the coast of sort of the continental U.S., along the East Coast or on the West Coast. In fact, the Canyons of Seamounts Marine Monument was just stripped of a lot of its protections for fishing by an executive order by President Trump because so many people want to fish it. There's a large population and a huge fishing community in that area that are saying the restrictions aren't fair and that they should be able to fish on seamounts and banks and canyons, even though that monument was dedicated there to protect that area so that it would spill over into other areas. So politically, it makes sense. It makes a lot of people happy. It could make your base happy. There's just a lot of conflict of interest in there. They could ignore the science, which they did, which the Trump administration did on this recent move for the Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. Protecting of that is very difficult when you have the protections going on and off, on and off. And again, the legislation has to be there. These are executive order types of protections, and they're made vulnerable because they are executive order protections. The next president can either enforce or reinforce or put back the legislation, or they can strip it down even further. So that could be a big problem if it goes back and forth, back and forth. So protection often happens where conflict is lowest. Think about that. We have remote areas that make it easy and say, yeah, we're like 90% all the way to hit the 30 by 30 on the oceans, but you're not really, because you're not doing it where it's really, really important. So again, the area and where it's located, just because it's remote doesn't mean it's the best thing. It's the lowest hanging fruit, sure, but it still affects typical populations that are historically made decisions against, where people are feeling the decisions against them, which is not great. And then, of course, you have weak enforcement capacity. So many coastal nations lack patrol vessels, satellite monitoring, legal frameworks to prosecute violations, and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, IUU fishing, continues in some protected areas because countries are not equipped with the right tools to be able to enforce these areas. So without enforcement, designation alone does not stop extraction. Now, Indonesia, a number of years ago, took some extreme measures to protect their coastline from illegal fishers, and they started bombing some ships if they didn't leave when the warnings were given. They've also boarded other foreign ships that were coming in their exclusive economic zone and taken over and, released and saved fishery slaves and so forth. So it could be a lot. Now, of course, there's also multiple loopholes in a lot of the legislation. So some MPAs allow industrial fishing, oil and gas activity, mining exploration, infrastructure development. They're technically protected, but functionally exploited. So having those loopholes is not good. And this is where the credibility of the actual protection actually matters. So credibility is very important. I guess the question when you look at paper parks and why it matters so much is, do MPAs actually work when they're real? Are they actually working? Is this something that is important to have? Like, why are we striving to have effective marine protected areas? So strongly enforced, fully protected MPAs show clear differences. Evidence shows that increased fish biomass happens, large body sizes happen, spillover into surrounding fisheries will happen, recovery of predators will happen. When you protect sharks that go and migrate in and out, and you protect, say, like a nursery area or like a spawning site, this could be extremely important in protecting these animals, and that can help shape what your food web looks like within this body of water. Peer-reviewed studies have demonstrated that fully protected reserves can increase biomass several-fold compared to fished areas. So when MPAs are fully protected and enforced, they work. The science is not ambiguous. Why do marine protected areas matter to ocean conservation? So here's the issue. If policymakers count paper parks as conservation success, we are overestimating progress. Biodiversity loss in country continues to happen. Fisheries decline continues to happen. Public trust erodes within these paper parks because people are not going to believe the government when they say that these are fully protected when they're not fully protected, or that there's a point in putting marine protected areas when you're not going to fully protect them. False protection can be worse than no protection because it hides the problem. It could lead to declining shark populations, coral reef degradation, overfishing statistics. Without the policy in place and the right framework in place, and that's the boring stuff, I get it, like I totally understand, but without that in place, then you're not going to get the beautiful coral reefs. And when you take away the human activities, the human disturbances that can happen that I've talked about in this episode, you are going to allow the natural system to take its course and allow coral reefs to increase their complexity, allow coral reefs to rebuild and adapt to the climate change effects as much as it could. You are going to allow recovery of critical ocean habitats that not only protect biodiversity and provide food and fisheries for like coastal economics, but also are carbon sinks that are way better than your terrestrial counterparts like trees and so forth, because they absorb more carbon and sequester more carbon into the ocean floor than any other natural land plant. And so having those become extremely important. So here's what really needs to change. We really need to shift from an area based on just shallow metrics to effective metrics. So government should be reporting publicly on how well these MPAs are doing, how well these land protected areas are doing. There should not just be like, this is how much we have covered. This is how good it is. Show the positives of it. Show how the trends go from really down to up in biomass and numbers, biodiversity increases, stability increases. We're starting to see recovery in habitats. Tell that to the people. And have that increased transparency using satellite tracking and public data. Have those on websites available. Ocean Networks Canada has a great way of sharing data. If we can allow governments to do the same thing about fisheries data, about biodiversity, about how MPAs are doing well, and how they're monitoring and how they're prosecuting people, this becomes really trustworthy. Transparency is always fully trustworthy. And then, of course, fund enforcement, fund management, prioritize high biodiversity and in high pressure regions. This is where it gets tough. It gets tough to do. And then to clearly define levels of protection. We need to know what those protections are. Just because you call it different names, know who's protecting it and what those protections could be and how well are they going to be protected in the future. So an MPA is not just a conservation solution. It's a tool. And a tool only works if they are used properly. That's really what it comes down to. The ocean does not care what is written in legislation. It responds to what actually happens in the water. That's where we need to really get down to it. So if you want to understand what's really happening in ocean conservation, not just the numbers on a map, subscribe to Ocean Decoded. Next episode, we are breaking down the 30 by 30 target and whether it actually protects marine biodiversity. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Ocean Decoded. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.